Good evening and welcome to Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together. Yes, you've heard it before, but this year, particularly for the Muslim community, it's a very true saying in a very new way. Ramadan is, of course, characterized by the iftar meal, the breaking of bread amongst friends and neighbours. Last year, the Affinity Foundation hosted over 45 house iftars and 10 institutional iftars, including up to 350 guests. This year, as COVID-19 has made its way across the country, that's impossible. So Affinity has decided to carry Ramadan to an online platform. Ramadan Conversations is a daily 1 hour live Ramadan conversation, and each episode will be live streamed and later uploaded on Affinity's YouTube page for you to suggest your friends take a look or even look at once more yourself. Our guests will include people from all walks of life: parliamentarians, religious and community leaders, academics and sports celebrities, not only from Australia, but around the world. And as a former ABC broadcaster with a special interest in religion, it's my great pleasure to host these conversations, together with a number of assistant hosts drawn from the Muslim community to assist us in our Ramadan understanding. Tonight, we're joined by Sukan Alkin, and Sukan is a teacher and board member of Wisdom College in Brisbane. He spent some years living in the United States and Canada before returning to Australia to settle in Queensland, where he's also active in the Queensland Intercultural Society. Sukan, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here, co-hosting with you, and honoured. It's quite interesting having these conversations too online.
It is indeed, and it's a new experience for many. One I think is the beginning of a whole new way of sharing friendships. Given your many years in the field of education, you've taught in schools around Australia, from Brisbane to Perth, and also Canada and the United States. What keeps you going? What keeps you engaged with kids?
To be honest, it's the love of learning and also love of education. And also on top of that, what drives me is wanting to help those who need to be supported, both educationally and both morally as well. I mean, in being involved in starting up of a school was quite challenging, but that challenges, when they bear fruit, you feel quite happy with those challenges, and then you realize, I'm glad that I took the challenges. However, it's not an individual effort; it's a group effort. We had excellent team members, all in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and even overseas when I went to Canada and USA. It was the same Hizmet movement people working together, and the goal is obviously to educate as much as we can.
At a general level, do you have any observations about the differing school systems in Australia and the United States?
Yes, there is actually quite interesting. What I've actually came across, especially in USA, was the homeschooling system, where parents can have them at home whenever they see it appropriate. I sort of realized, yes, there is something like this in Australia, but I did not see it being implemented. But I saw quite a few homeschooling in US. However, on top of that, the uniqueness that I've seen with the education system in USA, where in Australia we have three types of education system, whether it be public education or state education, independent schools, and Catholic school education. Whereas in USA there was either private school or state school, and also the community-run schools, which they call them charter schools. And I worked in one of those charter schools. It's not like a selective school. Whoever lives within the boundaries of that school area, they were most welcome and enrolled their kids. What was most interesting, especially when there was a lot of applications, sometimes they had to do what they call a lottery system. The names of the students were placed in a spreadsheet, and then there's about almost 1,000 or 2,000 applicants, and there was only 65, 70 positions available. Those who were lucky were drawn and randomly, and they got accepted. That was quite interesting for me. It wasn't like whoever enrolled or whatever, whoever applied. The lottery system was quite interesting for me.
Yes, that charter system is something that's been discussed from time to time in Australia, because you've now got charter schools in England also. It's not our central
Yeah.
topic tonight, but it's interesting to know that you're
No.
keeping an eye on how things are developing around the world. Just a final question before we move on. In the midst of this
Yeah.
COVID-19 pandemic, how's it affected your work as a teacher, particularly the school system that you're working in with an independent college system?
Well, to be honest, every one of our staff members, including myself, we were very nervous. We were thinking, hold on a minute, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? You know, as teachers, we'd like to see forward to plan ahead and implement our plans and programs accordingly. This suddenly popped up. We were all amazed, and obviously, I did have some idea in terms of doing online education, where we had the Google Classroom system, where I was starting to set up for the school. With this, COVID-19 came in, it was just a speedy process, and everyone had to learn the technology quite faster than usual, and they had to embrace it whether they liked it or not. And the online education system that we placed in, I mean, it has been very effective so far. Initially, I mean, my first couple of days were, how effective are we going to be? How effective are we going to be delivering the education? Luckily, last week was our first week, and at the end of the week, we had a staff meeting. And the staff meeting, by the way, is online. We had it, and we had a discussion together online. And the teachers were more relieved because they had some idea on how to go about it. On top of that, the one other thing that we had was because we were put of our routine, everyone was confused. Now we are putting ourselves back into routine again, which was wonderful.
Yeah, it's a pretty challenging world, and perhaps we'll come back over the next couple of weeks and touch on some of those aspects of your experience
Definitely.
again. But now, Sukan, let's pause and reflect for a few moments with this
Yes.
special feature for Ramadan, some Sufi music from Salia Reshuglu in Melbourne. Salia, tell us
Okay.
about Turkish Kanun.
Is Salia there?
We're looking for Salia.
This is a Kanun. Kanun means in Arabic law, so it's a law of the music. Like everyone tunes to this instrument, like piano. So the Kanun has 78 nylon strings. It's made out of 8 different wood. It's got bridge. It's got skin, which bridge sits on the skin. So each string weighs about 10 kilos when it's tuned. So that's about 800 kilos weight on top of that skin here, which you call it. Then we have these switches here. So we divide the sound to 8 different commas. And the instrument itself, it's made out of, I said, 8 different woods, like rosewood, hardwood, pine, white pine, maple, and sycamore, and ebony, and all that. So I'd like to give you more, but unfortunately we have short time. I'll apply something for you guys.
Splendid.
Oh, thank you. That was. Let me just tell you something about what he played, John.
Yeah.
Uh, he played the nasheed called Tala al-Badru Alayna. It's a traditional Islamic poem known as nasheed that the Ansar sang for Muhammad upon his arrival at Medina. Many sources claim it was first sung as he sought refuge, thereafter being forced to leave his hometown of Mecca. There you go.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that background, Sukan. Well, now it's time
You're
to
welcome.
turn to our special guests. And tonight's first guest is Western Sydney's University Chancellor, Professor Peter Sherigold. For two decades, Dr. Shergold was a senior public servant in the Australian Public Service, serving from 2003 to 2008 as Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Since 2015, he's been the New South Wales Coordinator General of Refugee Settlement. Peter Shergold is also chair of Opal Aged Care, which operates some 77 residential homes around the nation. Professor Peter Shergold, welcome to this Ramadan conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. Unfortunately, I've got a very poor reception and I may drop out.
Well, we shall,
It's all right. You sound good,
try our
Professor.
best.
Do your
Peter
best.
Shergold, in the context of the current concerns over COVID-19, as chair of a large aged care business, your operations are in the front line of the crisis, and currently, particularly over the last couple of days, the centre of the discussion on what's being called social distancing. The Prime Minister is urging visitation on a limited basis. The aged care providers are for continuing full isolation or lockdown. To what extent should we socially isolate the aged, and how are you dealing with this issue?
John, it's such a good question, and it's one of these wicked problems. It's a balancing act. Obviously, I want to keep my residents as safe as is possible. And of course, people within the aged care homes are often worried about visitors coming in and bringing COVID-19. Against that, we need to be able to be open and give them as much communication as possible. So already, for example, if someone is getting near the end, we allow their family to join them for those final days. We make sure everybody has iPads and technology that they can communicate with their family. We encourage window visits. If someone's just come to the aged care home, we provide opportunities for relatives to visit. And I'd like to do more. The difficulty, of course, is that the fact is that aged care homes have been hotspots for coronavirus. So trying to balance your concern for letting people see their family, but protecting them. There isn't an easy answer, and it's a constant balancing act.
Of course, you've seen it from both sides as both a public servant and now in the business world outside of that. That interface is sometimes irreconcilable, ultimately.
It is. You would like to think you live in a world where ethics is easy and it's yes or no. What I think we're learning from this pandemic is so much of it is ifs and buts. How much do we deal with a health problem? How much do we balance that against economic interest? When I'm talking to my, what I think really courageous frontline staff going into aged care homes every day, you really confront the ethical issues of how to make the right calls, the right balance.
There's a Royal Commission on Aged Care at the moment. What do you think are the major, what do you think are emerging as the major lessons from that at this stage, at this early stage, really?
Yes, a great question, John. The draft report, or the initial report from the Royal Commission, was called Neglect. And it was about neglect in some homes, but frankly, it's a much bigger issue. Neglect starts with the community. Too many old people go into their final years without family support. Let me tell you a very hard truth, because, of course, I love it when families loved ones in they are
Oh, we've got a dropout, it seems. Peter, you just keep going and we'll pick you up.
Families, not really, visiting their elders. And it's a challenge, I think, for the whole society.
Yes, we've got to recover our sense of connectedness with the with other generations. It's almost a Western society dilemma that's been growing over the last generation or two, hasn't it?
You just put your finger on it. It is a Western society dilemma, but of course it is also, in a way, a migrant dilemma. People are often living now a long way from their children and their grandchildren live. And if your children have gone to settle in Perth and you're in an aged care home in Western Sydney, then it can be very difficult. The good thing is never let a crisis go to waste. And what we have done is we have really moved over this last 6 weeks to make sure families can now stay much better connected no matter where they're living, using Zoom, using MS Teams, using Skype. It's been an extraordinary success. And this is something after the pandemic has passed, that we will continue to do. Use this technology as we're doing this evening.
Sukan, you might like to pick up with the next question.
Yes. Professor Peter, welcome on board. Being the University of Sydney, Western Sydney student I was back then, does the University of Western Sydney
I
has
could
a
just
strong...
tell looking at you, you were an alumni.
I am an alumni. University of Western Sydney has a strong migrant population, many of whom come from majority Muslim countries. Do you have cultural integration programs, and how is the university able to reflect the significance of periods
I'm not
such
hearing
as
anything
Ramadan?
at the moment, Matt.
Did you hear that, Professor?
Apologies that I missed the question. No, I apologize that I didn't.
That's okay. I mean, I will repeat that. University of Western Sydney has a strong migrant population, many of whom come from majority Muslim countries. Do you have cultural integration programs, and how is the university able to reflect the significance of periods such as Ramadan?
I think Western Sydney is the university absolutely integrated into the community. One of the greatest successes, which I've partly helped to champion, is making places available for refugees. Would you believe that we now have around 7,000 students who, 700 students who came here as refugees? A third students go home at night and speak a language other than English when they get home. And for us, the Muslim community is a key part of the university, a key part of the university. And one of the great regrets that I have is this year, unlike last year, we will not be able to host the normal iftar dinner, because it is a way of the university saying we are and want to be an absolute part of this diverse group of people, domestic students who make Western Sydney University their place of learning.
For the universities, there's other crises as well out of this COVID virus epidemic. And the government, for instance, with a lot of the universities are establishing hardship funds for their students. The government is saying, well, look, we've got to draw the line somewhere. But for many of these students, the options aren't as simple as going home. As a former senior bureaucrat, you'd understand that very well.
I hate the message that came out from when the Prime Minister said, go home. Whatever he intended, it sent out a very negative message. The fact is, overseas students are doing it hard. 80% of them work when they're in Australia, and now those sources of income have been cut off. So I have a hardship fund. I am very proud that the Vice Chancellor is contributing 30% of his income. My senior staff at the university are contributing 20% of the university. Myself and the other board members are contributing all of our stipends into that hardship fund to try and help not just domestic students, but particularly that significant number of overseas students from around the world who have worked here and now are being left bereft. It is, I think, a quite challenging situation.
Another one that you as a bureaucrat might have a different response to when you were sitting in a different chair.
Well, I would have had a different response. And although I think, to return, it is an ethical issue, it is also an economic issue. Overseas.
You've got a continuing interest in migration. In last night's conversation on this program, we spoke with Professor Mary Crock from the University of Sydney about the plight of refugees in Turkey and Syria as COVID-19 creeps into those refugee camps. There are Australian women and innocent children in those places. Does the government have any responsibility here with regard to, say, bringing them home?
Well, of course, I think there is a responsibility, and I'm sure that the government is hearing both. Well, I hope it is hearing both sides of this complex issue. But it is true that the really the only people, the only institution that can bring them home is the government, and the government both making that allowable and in indeed providing assistance to help make it happen. But the difficulty is at the moment, of course, is that a whole range of concerns about refugees and where they are scattered around the world, inside and outside camps, all that, I'm afraid, is being lost not in the fog of war, but being lost in the fog of COVID-19.
Well, we're running out of time here, but just one or two more questions. Looking at the role you have as an experienced bureaucrat and a vice-chancellor, and somebody who's done the hard yards as far as working for the best of the Australian community over many years, what do you take as some of the overarching messages for our civil society at a period like this, when the coincidence of something like Ramadan and the iftar meal tradition comes lockstep with social isolation?
You know, what I take from this is governments can't do anything without their citizens. If you notice, whenever the Prime Minister or the Premier is talking about social distancing, talking to Muslim leaders about the need to change the way they celebrate their religious beliefs. All of this depends on citizens who are willing to engage with government and understand why they're being asked to do these things. Learn what public service can learn is you need to do things to them or for them. If there's that one message we can take out of the response to this pandemic, I hope it will be that.
Professor Peter Sherigold, it's been great for you to give us your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Professor.
Well, Sukan, we do have time for another piece of music, and I think again we're hearing from Sally in Melbourne. Thank you for that that beautiful performance.
That
Sukan,
was
I guess
wonderful.
that music has
I enjoyed
some Sufi influence behind it too, would it?
There is actually, this is a poem written by the Ottoman sultans, and the Turkish version is Uyan ey gözlerim gafletten uyan. In English, it means "Wake up, O my eyes, from heedlessness." So he fell asleep in the morning, and then he thought he was heedless because of that. So he started writing this poem.
That's an
But
appropriate
basically,
message for us at a time of enforced rest.
true,
We shall move
true.
on. Our next guest is Dr. Brian Adams. He's the director of the Centre for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue at Griffith University. Uh,
Hmm.
Dr. Adams is primarily focused on promoting respect and understanding across cultural, religious, and organisational boundaries. He's the founder of the G20 Interfaith Forum and the Commonwealth Dialogue Conference. These are annual public dialogue platforms to draw on interfaith insight and experience and develop recommendations on issues relevant to the G20 and Commonwealth leaderships. Brian Adams, welcome to Ramadan Conversations.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to see you again,
Hello,
John.
Brian.
Yes, good to see you
Hello,
again
Sukan,
too.
my friend. Yeah.
Brian, we mentioned you as a founder, one of the founders of the G20 Interfaith Forum and Commonwealth Dialogue Conference at a time when religious faith in the West is diminishing, if anything. It must have taken a fair bit of energy to get a general acceptance of the significance of religious thought in these forums. Why were you so keen to do it?
Well, first of all, I can't say we have achieved acceptance of it. It depends very much on the country and the context. So there are certain parts of the G20, for example, as with the Commonwealth, that are more open to public legitimacy for a faith-based perspective. So it's still an ongoing challenge, actually, every year. But to answer your question more specifically, look, much of my career has been spent working on difficult issues. And I find that if you leave out faith-based perspectives for many of these issues, you're going to struggle to find a sustainable resolution or solution to that. And so to me, it's clear, and it just makes sense that you have to engage with it.
Sukan, do you have an observation there or a question?
I do, Brian. I just want to ask, Brian, what is the role of the Centre for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue Centre at the Griffith Uni?
Just what is the role? It's
Yes.
well, I think
what is the role here?
Yeah, I think we play a very interesting role because we straddle unusual divides in the sense that we're on a public university campus, but we also engage with communities of faith. So we're able to bridge the faith scholarly divides, the secular faith divides as well, in terms of our work, in terms of our research. But it also allows us to be very useful partners when working with governments, working with police, the medical field, business, these quintessential secular institutions that still have to provide services for or call upon or respond to the needs of those that they govern, including faith communities. So we're in a very powerful position, and therefore can play an important role, I think, in Western society.
Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting if you go back to a couple of generations ago, such an institute would have been recognised as being needed, but in some ways it would have been more difficult to establish because people were concerned to protect their doctrinal or denominational or faith-based boundaries. now you're in a position where, though religion is declining in general popularity, you're getting a more willing recognition that people need to talk across the great gulfs that can divide them on such issues.
Yeah, and in fact, that may go hand in hand. That as religiosity or practice of a professed religious tradition, it seems to be on the decline in much of the Western world, that at the same time there would be a greater acknowledgement from within the traditions themselves as well as without, that hey, we need to work together, we need to reach across and have better understanding.
Definitely.
The world's great religions are all civilizational, and I think that's probably their great strength, but it's also the thing that engenders the most fear. When people see a new religious community or tradition entering their community, at some visceral level, some regard it as somehow a strength, a threat rather to who they are, to what they are. I mean, we saw Pauline Hanson's performance with the burqa in the Senate, an extraordinary moment, which was a moment of fear in a sense, wasn't it?
It was.
I agree, yes. And that's not an unusual question in interfaith dialogue, but also within traditions themselves. And my general response comes from my own experience. And it's that engaging with, in dialogue with someone of a different tradition or a different worldview or civilizational perspective or approach doesn't have to be threatening, in the sense that learning a foreign language doesn't have to be threatening. So as I study French, for example, I haven't left my English roots behind. I no longer, I can't say that, oh, I can't, French is so much better, forget English or something like that. What actually happens is that I understand English even better after having learned another language. And I find that the same with religious traditions, that as I learn about the richness, the distinctiveness, the very strange differences even in different traditions, it pushes me to reflect on my own beliefs, my own understandings, my own assumptions, and therefore I understand my tradition even better.
Ramadan, it's one of those periods of reflection common to several of the great faith traditions, not Ramadan itself, but those periods of reflection. Are we yet in a position where across that gulf, that divide, we can appreciate and to some extent share in such events with other faith traditions without feeling that in some way we're polluting our own faith?
Well, I think the answer is clearly yes, we can. It takes a lot of work. It's not something that happens easily. Just it's human nature to be challenged when faced with something different. But also, human nature is such that we ultimately decide how we respond to that situation. And I find that society is, let's say it's a big boat that we're all trying to row. Now we have some that are rowing much faster than others, and you've got to work to bring the slower rowers along, if I may say that. And the same with engaging with religious difference, is there are some who are ready to do it. They're ready to jump in that boat and just take off. While there are others who are, well, I just want to dip my toe in the water. Or perhaps I'll just watch from the shore, and encouraging them to get into the boat and then begin rowing as well. And that takes leadership, that takes a lot of work, it takes patience and understanding, and even compassion.
Sukan, do you have observations yourself about that?
Yeah, I mean, Brian and I have been working for the last year or two. We have had iftar dinners together, and this year we had a meeting. We cannot have it because of COVID-19, and I'm pretty sure he's as a professor in his field facing the COVID-19. What has implications it has on yourself and on the university? If you can just brief us that. COVID-19?
Well, the COVID-19 on myself. Well, one, I'm the father of a big and beautiful family, and so our 5 children are at home and being schooled from home. So that has, of course, a very big impact on the dynamics and the things we're learning. And the thing that I'm praying for at this time is that through this, not only do we remain healthy and safe, but that we'll be more unified as a family. I think if we are stronger as a family, we're better able to strengthen those about us in our neighborhood and others. So that's one way how it affects me personally. Professionally, at the university is immensely challenged. This is a make or break year for many universities in Queensland. We have a demographic drop off in terms of enrollment, roughly 30% broadly across the state, due to some changes that happened several years ago in the age of school entrance. And then to have on top of that an important part, not just an economic boost to the university, but also all that our international students bring to the university in terms of energy and perspective and strength that's been taken away. And so we really are under immense pressure, and would love for the government, the federal government in particular, to recognize the very long-lasting impacts this may have on Australian society.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary thought, and Peter Sherigold alluded to some of that too, just the impact it's having on student bodies. And of course, you've got the international impact of what happens to your overseas students. Post that, you've already got China making noises about using education as a weapon in some future diplomacy. It just throws it all up in the air, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Brian, Adams, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's a conversation that we could continue for some time, but your insights have been very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
And thanks so much, for Ahmed and Sukan and all of you who have worked so hard to bring this to pass. This is a wonderful service. Thank you very much. And Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, Sukan, time gets away very quickly on a program like
this.
Indeed.
It's
time now for our final guest. Our final guest tonight is Pauline Wright. And Pauline is the president of the Law Council of Australia. She's a partner and principal of PJ Donnellan and Company Solicitors on the New South Wales Central Coast, and she's also an accredited specialist in environmental planning and development law. She was president of the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties in 2018 and 2019, and only the second woman to be elected to that role. Pauline was president of the Law Society of New South Wales in 2017. She's also a past president of the Urban Development Institute of Australia on the Central Coast, and she was appointed as director of the Law Council of Australia in 2016. Pauline, a considerable CV. Welcome to this Ramadan conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, John. Lovely to be here.
Hello,
Pauline. We hear and see you.
We
hear and see you from time to time in the media. It seems your brief at the Law Council is extraordinarily wide. It's not just civil liberties issues.
No, it's not. It's certainly not just civil liberties. We, although that is part of it, of course, the rule of law crosses over very much with civil liberties. But we also deal with issues that affect our profession more broadly, all sorts of things. And during this COVID-19 crisis, of course, we've been helping the profession to deal with how to respond in this strange world we're living in.
True.
Does the Law Council also have some role as a sort of custodian or guardian of the legal profession regarding ethics and practice, that sort of thing?
It does. We're very much involved in setting the standards in a way, on a national basis for our member bodies. We're the peak body, so that each of the law societies and bar associations across Australia are our members. And we deal with them, liaise with them to ensure that the legal profession in Australia is held to the highest standards ethically and also in terms of the technical expertise and knowledge that our profession has.
What are your major concerns at the moment? There are, of course, implications in government actions in dealing with the crises of this past summer, from bushfires to coronavirus. I guess you have to keep a watch on where things are going and when lines are being crossed. And crises bring upon this whole question of crossing of lines.
True.
They do indeed. It's a very difficult situation. At the moment, of course, responding to the COVID-19 crisis, the government is treading a very fine line between the protection of our health and safety and our lives with that protection of our liberties at the same time. There's got to be this balancing act. And I think it's a fine one to tread and a difficult one for governments to do. Bringing in, for instance, the COVID-19 tracing app has been a difficult line for them. They've got to assure us as Australians that we can be comfortable that our private data is going to be safe and secure if we're going to adopt this app in order to help the country recover from the lockdowns.
Yeah, it's a difficult one too when, of course, the government can point and say, look, Google, Facebook, Apple, they can track you everywhere around the place anyway. So why are you fussed about it?
Yeah.
And you've got to say, you're the government. It's different.
That's right. That's right. They are the government. And so while we've got a benign government that's not going to, do the wrong thing by us, we hope, that's okay. But if we had a different style of government, if we had an authoritarian style government, we would be very uncomfortable if they had the capacity to obtain and keep our data of a very personal nature, who we see, how long we see them for, their phone numbers. That's a big ask for Australians used to living in a liberal democracy.
Sukan, do you have any observations at this point?
Yeah, I have a question for her. And just how important are the roles of civil society groups such as Affinity to our democracy? I'm thinking of events like the parliamentary iftars of recent years, but also the broader bridge building functions of such groups.
I think it's vital because in a society like Australia's, where we've got a really multicultural community that we all live in, it's important for us to come together and meet each other, walk together, eat together, share a meal, and to get to know each other and the different customs and cultures that we're so lucky to have. It's such a rich and diverse community that we have in Australia. And it's, I think, vital that we get together to understand each other better, because when we understand each other better, we're not so afraid of each other. I think that's really
You've got an interesting challenge at the moment in that regard. I'm thinking perhaps in an area that I've worked in for many years, which is the media professionally, and the challenge last year you had the case with the ABC and News Limited and a police raid on the media. Now, some people would say, good thing, it's about time they were brought in the line, because media itself plays a very divisive role in our society. The media is either seen as your best friend or your worst and deadly enemy. And this becomes a constant roundabout for you. And it must be terribly difficult to keep the balance.
Well, it's very important that we have a strong, independent media, because really in our society, the two groups of people in society that really keep the government honest are the journalists and the lawyers. because in so many ways we can scrutinize activities. Lawyers can do it because we understand the law. We understand the implications of laws that the government is seeking to introduce. We understand what laws need to be changed. And journalists, because they can investigate and they can report and they can get the public's attention where they feel that government needs to be held to account. So I think that our two professions are vital, and we must remain independent and free to do our jobs and to go about our jobs without fear of interference by the government.
Yes, and it comes back to the question that Sukan raised about preserving a healthy civil society, because it's there where all communities can flourish.
Exactly. It's absolutely vital, and we need to be able to come together and trust each other. And I think bringing different perspectives to the laws that government is proposing is vital, so that consultation with non-government organisations by government is really vital. So organisations like Affinity bring a particular perspective that I think government needs to hear and see.
And in that note, I also say breaking the fear of the unknown. I mean, through conversations, through dialogue, through iftar dinners, getting to know each other. I think that's the main thing with the iftar dinners, that we share and socialize, I suppose.
I think
Just
so,
getting to
because
know you in a personal way.
Yeah,
once you start a
definitely.
conversation with someone, it breaks down all of that, all of those fears that we have of the different, the not us. Suddenly, whoever we're sitting with becomes us, one of us, and we become one of them.
Pauline, it's been great of you to join us tonight. Thank you so much for giving us your time on this virtual iftar. We've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pauline.
Well, Sukan, we've almost run out of time, but let's just sort of round up our discussion this evening. What for you were the sort of more interesting points that you took up this evening?
I mean, at the end of the day, what I saw, we are all human beings, and we are confronted by COVID-19, and that's our common fear. At the same time, a common way of dealing our problems together. And this is, we're doing it online also. At least we are trying to connect and link and have that conversation in order for us to feel better and understand the situation that we are all in. And as we said, we are all in this together.
Yes. It's interesting that we had a world-class bureaucrat. We had a significant academic in the area of interfaith, and a senior member of the law profession. And each of them was saying, at heart, what I'm about is helping build community.
Beautiful. It was wonderful. I mean, as I was trying to say, like with Brian, I asked him specifically, how has it affected your family? We are human beings. We have families. You know what I mean? And you can see that. Yes, he's got his profession. Everyone has their professions, but you have a family to worry about. And then sharing all of these things, that we are vulnerable, but at the same time we are strong together, and we learn from each other, is wonderful. It was excellent. All three of them were wonderful. Well, the Kanun, I like Kanun as well. The music, the instrument. Not that I can play it, but I like listening to it.
It's an extraordinarily complex instrument, isn't it? The way it was explained to us. I mean, I'm not sure I could. I'd need to go back and take a lesson in just understanding what it is. But it seems it's one of those instruments too, which as a stringed instrument, you could almost see it in the Western terms of what we call a zither or an auto harp. Their familiarities which show these instruments have been spreading for thousands of years across cultures.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if your harp on your lap.
Indeed. Now, you're going to be back with us again in a couple of weeks' time, or during this series of Ramadan Conversations. What for you are the most
Inshallah.
important things to find in these conversations? And we look at the work of
I
Affinity and you
think,
see how it's been spread. Yeah.
yeah, I have been discussing these with Ahmed when he came across with this idea. I said, you know, Ahmed, you're a crazy guy with this conversation, Ramadan Conversations. It's a big production. And he says, look, I like challenges. I'm going to do this. And I'm glad he did it. I'm glad he did it. And I'm looking forward to the other conversations. At the end of the day, I mean, we need to connect somehow. We need to reflect on what we would like to share and inform our community. As being community leaders, we try to mend those differences somehow, and we base our values on our commons and focus on the commons. At the end of the day, first and foremost, we are human beings.
Well, Sukan, that's just about the right place to end this conversation this evening. I think that's all we have time for in today's program. So thank you all for being part of the team this evening, and I look forward to catching up again soon. And at home, or wherever you happen to be, thank you for joining this Ramadan conversation. Our next episode will be tomorrow. And as you've followed up our episodes, our program has hosted a number of guests. You might wish to view some of these discussions again. You can find them on the Affinity YouTube channel, headed Ramadan Conversations. And for this evening, thanks for joining us. Stay safe and have a blessed Ramadan.